Now, on the sad side of things, much of our country is shut down tonight. While Brisbane celebrates, places like Adelaide, well, you could fire a cannon and you wouldn't hit anyone at the moment. Exactly where they celebrated the Olympics being awarded to Australia in 1993 was what is now the International Passenger Terminal at Circular Quay in Sydney. Dead empty. The same too in beautiful streets of Melbourne where you cannot find anyone but that single person standing in front of a camera anywhere near today. And today was a day where there was a version of contrition, some sorries, some course corrections, some putting out the trash before the country goes and watches badminton for the next 2 weeks and we all become instant experts on Greco-Roman wrestling and sports climbing and all the other things we're going to pretend to be experts in for the next 2 weeks, and that's a fun distraction, no doubt. Is that we learnt today from the Deputy Chief Health Officer in Victoria, this is the offside at Bambi Eyes, Brett Sutton. Now, he said that one of the problems that led to so many cases, so many deaths, apart from the failures in hotel quarantine, was that they didn't lock down early enough last year. The consequences were one that went longer than Wuhan and one that still hurts that city to this very day while they are in their 5th lockdown. The professor was on the radio this morning and he said that in 2020, there was something they would have done differently. The direction says, everyone stay at home. I had to drive to work the next day. The roads were empty. Although I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Is this the right thing to do? The problem is that it was a decision which was made apparently a little too late. In New South Wales, the absurdity exists where if you work for the council, you can mow lawns. If you work in the private sector, you have to stay home. So our mate, Jim Penman from Jim's Mowing, has decided to launch a campaign for sanity to prevail a month into the lockdown in New South Wales. Now, I'll save you all the cases and data. It hasn't really changed in the past 24 hours. The story is exactly the same. Fairfield is the problem. The Northern Beaches isn't. So could somebody please tell me why somebody who's paid to mow lawns, not for the council, but for a private entity, can't do it in an area with 0 cases? I'd love somebody to ask that question of the Premier. Maybe I'll have to do it myself at some point. Meantime, of course, in Adelaide, you all know Rundle Mall, which again was empty today and had the police in it. A far cry from when Rundle Mall, of course, was opened in the 1980s, and it was celebrated in this amazing fashion by John Farnham. That's how they did things in Adelaide back in the 80s. Now in 2021, you've got Premier Marshmallow. You've got the Nutty Professor. And you can't leave your house because of a fistful of cases. Yes, it was just an excuse to play that song. Meantime, the Prime Minister has said that he's going to take responsibility for the good, the bad and the ugly of the vaccine rollout.
I take responsibility for the problems we've had, but I'm also taking responsibility for the solutions we're putting in place and the vaccination rates that we're now achieving.
So as we talked about last night, the question is, at some point in time, we're going to have to say, what are we going to do here when it comes to the right amount of people that have been vaccinated before we're able to not do lockdowns anymore? Because the reality is, even in a place like the United States, which has got about half or a little more of its population vaccinated, and they're fully reopened, they are still getting hundreds of deaths each and every day, tens of thousands of cases in the UK, and again, hundreds of deaths that are taking place there each and every week. So what is the magic number? Now, a presenter on Adelaide Radio tried to put words in the Prime Minister's mouth today, but his fight is worth playing.
But the reason you've got 12 million people currently locked down is because you got it so wrong in the first place.
No, I don't accept that. No, I'm sorry, I don't accept that. I mean, right now, there was under no plan. Was there any plan that said we'd be at 65%, 70% vaccination rates in this country? At no plan. There was no suggestion of that.
So here's the point. That's true. But of course, it doesn't matter. The narrative which is being pushed by Labor mates in the media is that it's all about vaccinations, remember? And as we told you last night, there has to be a magic number where the people who've been telling us 0 cases is all we can handle now, that there'll magically be a time when we can handle hundreds of cases and dozens of deaths. It just won't matter anymore.
The population being vaccinated, how many in percentage terms do you think until we start to see those freedoms, avoiding lockdown?
80% is about, with the Delta variant, is about what we should be aiming for.
10 million jabs or 80% of the adult population.
We probably need to have 80 to 85% of people over 16 to be vaccinated to get the likelihood of herd immunity.
What percentage of people need to be vaccinated. I'd expect it to be above 80% though, maybe even a fair bit above that.
So the same people who say 0 cases is what we need to do, the only way to live in a world with a few cases is to get to 80% vaccination. The only problem is that hasn't happened. It hasn't happened virtually anywhere in the world, and it won't happen here in Australia. Now think about the places that I just mentioned, the UK, the United States, even places like Israel, that are essentially fully reopened for business. Well, this is their actual vaccination rates today. Not dreaming, but today. Just 48% of people in Singapore are fully vaccinated. That's a way off from 80. In Canada, it's 51. It's 53 in the United Kingdom. It's 61% in Israel. But the best case scenario there is only 65% once you add the light green, which is the people who've had only one jab. 48% of people in the United States, 35% in Europe, 22% in Japan. The collective number in Australia is 29% of people that have either been fully vaccinated or partially, which is above the average of the rest of the world, above what is happening in New Zealand. Isn't it interesting? New Zealand is always brought up as an example of how to do things better, except their vaccine rollout. And poor old South Africa right now, well, they haven't even got, 7% of their population anywhere near vaccinated. So here's the deal. 75%, the Yanks aren't even there yet. 80%, Israel isn't even there yet. So the truth is, we're never going to get near that number. And let me explain why. Not because I want to give hope to the anti-vaxxers, they're lunatics. I believe that this is the way to get out of COVID jail, but we also have to be realistic about what polls are telling us about why people are not lining up around the block in absolute desperation to get vaccinated tomorrow. And it's not because they don't want to get vaccinated. Let me explain. Now, according to a poll that was out in The Guardian, the left-leaning Turnbull Times, put together by the Essential Media Group, just 63% of people either want it now or have got it. 27% of people say that they are waiting. So you go, well, hang on, Paul, what are you talking about? That gets us right up there, right? We're into the 90s. Well, I'll explain why not in a second. Because 11% of people say, I'm not touching this thing at all. It's their choice, but it's going to make sure that we end up in a world of lockdown. Because does anyone believe that those chief health officers who are constantly banging on about 0 cases magically wake up one day and say, yeah, 200 cases is okay? Because once you actually break down why are people waiting, it tells you about why we're not going to get to 80%. And it's not because people are stupid. It's because 41% of the people who are waiting want Pfizer. 29% or 30% of people just want to wait and see what happens to the people in their family. Is there adverse reactions? For others, it's just frankly too hard. They can't be bothered. And 11% of people say that they can't get the relevant time off work to be able to get the vaccine. So here's my point. Should as many people in Australia get vaccinated as possible? Absolutely. Can you force everyone to get vaccinated in Australia? No way. Can you try to bribe people with tickets to the footy or lotteries? Sure. But at a point in time, we have to realise that the dream of 80% or higher is too high. That in the United States, it's closer to 60%. The same for the UK. All of those places have reopened. But I'll tell you why in those countries they don't seem to have the same panic that we do. Because they, of course, have lost hundreds of thousands of people. 600,000 people have died in the United States from coronavirus. So when 10, 20, 30, 200 or 500 people die every single week, it's very small in comparison to the worst of the pandemic. But because Australia has largely been hidden from the worst of the pandemic by the joy of us being an island and the government doing the right thing of closing off those national borders, the worst of the pandemic for us is when Victoria got it wrong on hotel quarantine and all those people died. We have not had the hundreds of cases a day, and we have not had the dozens of deaths a day. So will the same people have the balls to be able to eventually live with people dying of or with coronavirus? I hope so, because they have to. Otherwise, we are just on a merry-go-round of lockdowns that never, ever, ever, ever ends.